speaking from the practice of innovation on the ground in service of mitigation of climate change and biodiversity collapse, and in service of resilience and adaptation, very much to your point, Elisa. And our activity is focused on how we source, we build, we incubate, but most importantly, deploy innovation in place-based contexts, whether they are the places of global value chains or the places of cities and regions and, say, mining communities or agricultural communities, where there are very, very intractable, wicked issues to try and work out how to reconfigure under very short pressure of time and with massive uncertainty because of the complexity. So my speaking place is in part from enabling and supporting and holding that space. And it's a very significant effort that goes into holding that space and working with a set of institutional expectations around everything from funding to deliverables to assessment frameworks and to outcomes and timeframes that is frankly incompatible with the scale, the nature of the challenge as inherently complex challenges, and the reality of what it means to ultimately address the core intrinsic issue, which is to change ourselves. Humans, changing humans simply doesn't fit. Economic models, cost-benefit analyses, deliverables within 1 year, predictive outcomes, that is not the space we are having to face. So when I come to the question of what learners need to be, first of all, for me, the relationship between learning and innovation is absolutely interdependent. They are two sides of the same coin. In order to innovate, you need to be capable of learning constantly. In order to learn, you are effectively practicing an innovation of yourself. And if that self is a business identity or a small community or a street or a neighborhood or a whole city government, that's the game you're in. That's the act. So if I think about, in my experience, previously working in corporate contexts of helping very large listed organizations transform themselves at the core, and now looking in the climate space at the much, much grander scale and challenge we face, we need learners, first of all, to be every single person engaged on the ground trying to do something about climate. There is no meaningful distinction between a learner, somebody formally subscribed to university programs, sitting in a training room or acquiring information. We are learning our way into the future. That means that we all need to be explorers. And in order to explore, we need to be able to listen. And in order to listen, we need to listen to learn, not to listen to prove the point we already knew or to fix what we see, but genuinely to try to understand and see around the edges of what it is that we think we understand. And for that, it helps if we are humanists. I think one of the most exciting and inspiring acts I have seen the European Commission do is to pick up the idea of a new European Bauhaus, not necessarily for the legacy of the Bauhaus itself, but specifically for the principle of bringing art and science together in the effort of addressing sustainability, because it asks us to be humanists, which asks us to then learn how to think and to question and look at the assumptions we're applying in what we're doing. And then again, the notion of experimentation. Learners need to be experimenters, learning in contexts. The challenges of sustainability are specific. They're local, regional, global, but they're very specific. They're about meaning and identity, what people eat, because their sense of self is vested in that identity and context for literally centuries, how they choose to move about, how they choose to be. I think the final point on what learners need to be is in relationship, and that very much goes to what we've already been discussing, the sense of the interrelationships between things, but critically the relationships between people, that does help widen a sense of self, create greater social and emotional resilience and well-being, and begin to bring in the different perspectives that we require to forge a different sense of identity that is attractive enough to embrace, an identity around what it means to live and work sustainably. We're missing reference narratives, not reference narratives for what we need to stop doing, but reference narratives for what we might want to aspire to become. Where is our vision of who we are when we're living genuinely in respect of each other and our planet? And it's hard to unpick something solid enough to mobilize and to attract movements beyond utopias, something tangible, gritty, messy, but part of our world. So for me, that brings to, what do we need to understand? We need to start by understanding, invest a hell of a lot more in understanding ourselves. You know, make it mandatory in every single educational initiative, every single funding initiative, every single board, that we take some time to think about adult development, to think about the way humans relate, that we pay attention to what we're working with when we're working in any form of relationship with one another and with our context. And that we acknowledge the role and the power of meaning. Again, in a lot of our focus, we've been focused on substitution solutions, on technologies, on engineering, on ways of kind of wrangling ourselves out of the problem by using by using the tools that extend our brilliance and our ingenuity. Very, very rarely in that same moment have we asked ourselves, how is this meaningful? How does it tell us something about who we are, why we are, that inspires? And we're going to need that if we want to mobilize generations to work, to close gaps and work with each other in very tight timeframes to fundamentally change the substance of life. And then technically, I see every day in both recruitment, in working with people across multiple fronts, the legacy of our educational system is one in which we have taught people to think in terms of scarcity, efficiency, to some extent effectiveness. I would argue that's the thing we've kind of left off the table. We have done a relatively poor job in teaching people and equipping them in systems thinking, complexity, and in the skills you need to span boundaries. So the interdisciplinary thinking that Elisa was talking about. And we desperately need a massive ramp up in kind of 1.0, 1.2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What are the things we need to help people acquire? Just the basic tools of understanding that if you're dealing with complexity, you're going to need to deal with uncertainty. You're going to need to engage completely differently to the way in which we have all been tutored to structure time, plan our outcomes, monitor objectives, account for our funding. We need a very different language for the way in which we do deliver impact and the way in which we change one another and ourselves.